Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of ABA and MIA, where real talk meets real practice. I'm Karelix.
And I'm Mariam, and we're here to break down ABA, autism, and the everyday life of the 305.
With clarity, compassion, and a little Miami spice. So grab your cafecito and
Let's get
get
into
into
it.
it.
Welcome back, everyone, to ABA and MIA. Today, we are so excited to have Elissa R Mandel, who is a speech language pathologist and founder of Speech Works by Elissa. She specializes in helping children develop functional communication skills, who has extensive experience working with children with autism, speech delays, and childhood apraxia of speech. One of the reasons why I'm super excited to have Elissa on board with us is that we have the opportunity to collaborate on many shared clients over the years. Through that collaboration, I have seen firsthand how speech ABA work together to help move from sounds and approximations to meaningful communication. We have worked closely to support children in developing language, improving articulation, and building communication skills to generalize across all settings. So, throughout our conversations, we are going to discuss the biggest concerns parents have when their child is not talking, how to recognize the signs of apraxia, and what effective collaborations between professionals really look like. So, Alyssa, welcome to ABA and MIA. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be part of ABA in Miami. Miami is like a second home to me. It's incredible to be here with you guys today.
Well, thank you. And we just wanted to know a little bit more background. If you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself as a speech pathologist and what led you to specialize in working with children with communication challenges.
Wow, how much time do we have? I'm going to short. So my name is Elissa R Mandel professionally, and I have been basically searching out the most progressive techniques in the area of speech and language and auditory and motor skills for the past 30 years. I myself was not diagnosed until my third master's degree at the age of 28. So not only do I seek out the most progressive techniques for my clients, but I have sought them out for myself. Growing up without a diagnosis, I was diagnosed with a learning disability, autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. And growing up without any support, I basically had to learn how to support myself. As far as how I became a speech language pathologist, that's quite a long story. I'm going to make it short. But basically, I failed a lot. And I immediately after high school went to a university. My family forced me to go. They thought it would be a great experience for me. I went to a really large university, University of Maryland. And without accommodations and a diagnosis, it was impossible. So I basically was failing the first year. I was advised to find a different program and major. I was a scenic design major at the time. And so I went on a journey to try and find a different school or a different avenue to go down. So I applied to Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Clown School and got in. I called my parents with the exciting news, and my mom cried and said, "You're going to marry a clown, have clown babies, pet elephants." So instead of becoming a clown, I knew I wanted to do something that didn't require a lot of verbal communication. When I was diagnosed, we'll talk about that further, but when I was diagnosed, I was basically told that all of my life I had overcompensated with my strengths for my weaknesses. So IQ testing has changed now, but at the time, my performance skills were practically genius. I think like 138, 140 is the highest at that time. It's changed a lot. Normal is between 100 and 120. And my verbal skills were well below normal limits, in the 70s, the high 70s. So they explained that I overcompensated by performing instead of talking. So that was really interesting. So basically, after not becoming a clown, I went to community college, took some sign language classes because it's very much like miming. And I asked the professor what field I could use sign language with, and he pointed me in the direction of speech language pathology. Took my first class, and the professor basically said, hold your nose and say, try it, you guys. Hold your nose and try. You can't do it. The air goes through the nose. So it was at that time I had to learn everything about how our muscles coordinate for speech. It was so interesting for me, and it was a challenge. Verbal skills are a challenge for me, so I wanted to have better motor control over my muscles as well. So that's basically how I got into the field.
That's
amazing. My goodness, that is so interesting. I wasn't expecting you to say any of that. Wow. So you yourself are on the spectrum. You almost went to clown school. You became an SLP. What an interesting story. It's such a pleasure to have you here. I've been in the field for a long time, and I've always valued, collaborating with professionals such as yourself. So thank you. What an interesting story we're going to hear from you today, I'm sure.
Yeah, 100%. I didn't know that you were going to clown school. That was the first. I know, like you said, you mentioned you had a diagnosis, but not that. But I know you mentioned you worked with the Dr. Lovas, right? You were like an intern, and it's really rare because a speech pathologist going and looking at the ABA world, it's really like it's unheard of. So, how was your experience there?
It's very interesting. I kind of just fell into everything. I often feel like Forrest Gump, where I'm accidentally falling into these wonderful experiences. But in graduate school, the school that I was diagnosed was called Gallaudet University. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's the only deaf college in the world. It was actually founded by Abraham Lincoln. And if I hadn't, for me to have gotten a diagnosis, I know it was late, but compared to other individuals at this time, that's an early diagnosis. So if I hadn't gone to a school that was so geared towards handicaps and learning disabilities, I wouldn't have gotten a diagnosis. And so I'm really grateful. At that school, they gave me full accommodations after testing. And one of the specialties I had at the time was using horses as a therapy tool, so doing hippotherapy. So I had been a hippotherapist or a therapeutic horseback riding instructor for like 10 years, and I wanted to work with one of the best hippotherapists in the world. So the school gave me special permission to work in New Jersey with this woman. It happens that half of her caseload was ABA and half was hippotherapy. So I was basically forced. I mean, I had been studying ABA since 92, and this was 98. But she basically, her name is Sherry Haken Marino. She's the founder of Autism Think Tank in New Jersey. I don't know if you are familiar with that. She was specifically trained by Dr. Lovas and the UCLA staff. And they created a school at Rutgers University called Douglason Developmental Center. And so she was the director there, and basically learned all of Dr. Lovas's programs. So as an intern, she basically taught me everything. So I didn't directly work under him, but when I did, I moved to Las Vegas. I was recruited from New York to Las Vegas 20 years ago. And at the same time I was recruited, Dr. Lovas's son was recruited. And And it was just another happenstance. So we've been in collaboration since, I think, 2004 or 2005. Yeah, so basically, yeah, he was basically shocked that I knew all of LOAS programs because they're not written down anywhere. So, so I have about 30 years experience with ABA. I did, with collaboration with BCBAs, I often find there's a breakdown, not with understanding, but with the terminology that we use. Speech language pathologists use different terminology than BCBAs. We're talking about the same thing, but it's different wordage. And so it becomes confusing. So I actually attended Florida Institute of Technology for my BCBA, and I'm 6 credits short. I really don't necessarily want another certification. I have so many. But I did attend just so that I could learn the vocabulary and be able to communicate better with BCBAs.
So my question is, I know a lot of parents have this question. And we as BCBs, we're like familiar with autism, but we really don't have that background of understanding apraxia. We have some form of like, we have our terminologies, we do intervention. But when it comes to apraxia, you guys have more of a better understanding in how to approach and use specific techniques into, kind of teaching those kids how to communicate and articulate. If you had to explain it to our audience, how would you answer, what does apraxia mean?
That's a great question. That's something a lot of professionals and families are not familiar with. I find I have been specializing in apraxia of speech for longer than ABA. My nephew was born with a motor planning disorder. Basically, I learned from the top providers of apraxia in New York and learned some really progressive techniques. He had 5 different therapists. And that's how I first found an interest in learning about motor planning. Apraxia is basically where a child can hear sounds, but typical kids will learn how to talk based on what they hear. And for kids on the spectrum, they have different learning styles. So they need different ways of learning. Their auditory feedback isn't as strong. So basically, they need to manipulate a whole bunch of muscles to be able to learn how to talk. There's 6 muscle groups. You have muscles for speech breathing. That's the first muscle group. So if you are talking, you can feel air and puffs of streams. If you take your hand in front of your face and talk to yourself, you can feel the streams of air coming out. Yeah. So some of them are strong. So that has to be really well coordinated. And the next muscle group is vocal cords. For some sounds, they vibrate. For others, they don't. There's actually pairs of sounds where 5 out of 6 of the muscles are in the same place. For example, like P and B, all the muscles are in the same place except for the vocal cords. For B, the vocal cords vibrate, and for P, they don't. If you say P and B and touch your neck, you can feel. There are tons of sounds like T and D. Those are, we call them visine pairs because they look the same on the mouth, but the voicing is different. There's K and G, F and V. There's actually 2 TH sounds. One's voiced, one's unvoiced, like bath and bathe. I could go on forever, but we only have a couple of minutes. Then we have a muscle in the back of the throat that lets the air go through the nose versus the mouth, which we talked about already. And then we have the lip, jaw, and tongue. A lot of therapists really focus on the lip the most, but it's actually jaw stability that is crucial for intelligible speech. And so with apraxia, a lot of people don't realize apraxia is a spectrum, just like autism is a spectrum. For years, I was accused of overdiagnosing apraxia. And now we know that the most common speech disorder amongst autistic children are apraxia and auditory processing disorders. It's just about knowing where their muscles go. And like I said, typical peers learn how to manipulate all those muscles based on auditory feedback. They hear their mom say ball, the mom's holding a ball, they're holding a ball, and they move their muscles and play around based on what they heard. For our kiddos, they need more physical prompts, tactile prompts, kinesthetic prompts to learn how to move those muscles. It's the same as when we teach gross motor imitation. We say, clap your hands or do this, and then the instructor physically prompts the wrists and pulls their hands together. For speech, typically, I find that ABA programs will, because they don't know how to prompt these muscles and don't have that gut instinct like they do with grabbing the wrist, they're not prompting the muscles for speech. They're just giving no consequences until the child accidentally moves all their muscles in the right place and they say the word correctly. So you can imagine if you tell the child to say up and they can't say up, and you just keep saying, say up, no, try again, say up, no, try again. If that keeps going, the progress is going to be really slow. Same thing with clap hands. If we just say clap hands and they don't do it, and you give a no consequence and you just keep asking them to do it over and over without showing them how to move the muscles in the right place, then that progress for clap hands is going to take a really long time. So what I basically do is I go in and I teach the teams. I'm actually part of the ABA team, and I teach the team how to prompt those muscles for the individual client. And it makes progress so much faster. And there's so many easy, affordable, progressive tools out there to make it easy for BCBAs to follow along.
I love that explanation. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I have a question that's kind of a follow-up, because I love how you shared that apraxia is a spectrum, much like autism is a spectrum. I've never heard it being described like that in the past. And another thing that caught my attention was you mentioning that there's a muscle somewhere that allows the air to flow through your nose and not through your mouth. And I wonder, because I know quite a bit of kiddos on the spectrum who have apraxia. It's my understanding that approximately 20 to 30% of kiddos on the spectrum don't speak and will never be able to speak. I remember when I learned about apraxia, I remember learning that there isn't necessarily wrong with the vocal musculature, nothing necessarily wrong with the language centers of the brain, but there's something wrong with that disconnect, right? Like when the brain releases the message to the mouth, then the mouth doesn't move in the way that it's meant to move. So a lot of individuals who have apraxia can move their mouth with no problem to eat, for example. But since the brain is so compartmentalized, the area of the brain that controls the mouth to eat is different from the area of the brain that controls the mouth to actually speak. And so a lot of parents who I've tried to explain that to kind of get caught up in that. They're like, I don't get it. Like, if the mouth can move, the mouth can move, the mouth can move. And it's difficult for them to comprehend. So if you can speak a little bit on that, I would love it. And also, so like my part 2 is for the children. I often see children on the spectrum who sound like they talk, who sound like their nose is stuffy, even though their nose is not stuffy when they talk. And I wonder, since you're saying there's a muscle that controls the airflow, whether it's nasal or oral, like, how do we help them to not sound like their nose is stuffy? Because they can make complete sentences, they can mainstream, and so, in their classroom, they do really well with peers, but they sound like their nose is always stuffy. What do you say about that?
It's everything, both the questions all involve muscle memory. And so any motor task that we learn, driving, a dance routine, yoga, cooking, anything, For some people, naturally, their muscles will move, especially if it's a motivating activity in the right place. But for kids that have motor planning difficulty or apraxia, they need to be taught every movement. And you are absolutely correct that with apraxia of speech, when I do an evaluation, I evaluate range of motion, which means is the muscle moving to all the places it needs to be? The strength, is it weak? If the muscle is weak and needs to be strengthened, it's not. It's apraxia and muscle weakness, so they both need to be worked on. If it's motor planning, where like when you're learning to drive a stick shift. Have you ever tried to drive a stick shift? So you have to really think about where your hands and feet go, and you repeat it, and after some repetition, the muscle memory gets stronger. And then eventually one day you're grinding less gears and you're just driving and you're not even thinking about where your muscles go anymore. So that is basically motor planning and teaching your brain how to memorize the muscle movement. So typically, you had mentioned feeding too. Typically, if the muscles are not going in the right place for speech, they're not going in the right place for feeding. Yes, for a lot of kids, they can, if they don't have failure to thrive and they're getting enough calories, then they're not going to be flagged for appropriate muscle movements. A lot of the kiddos that I see, they have a delayed munch pattern instead of a mature rotary chew. And since they have enough intake, they aren't given therapy necessarily for getting those muscles to be more mature. So it's the same thing with speech as it is for feeding. It's just about getting the muscles in the right place.
Yeah, that's interesting because we have a client actually who had jaw stability issues. She wouldn't move her jaw a lot. And so we would have to do a lot of exercises that you recommended. So once she's done those exercises, she was able to actually chew her food instead of swallowing them or pocketing them until it dissolves. So yeah, that's interesting that you said that. So
I was wondering, we have a client. I've been doing this for a long time, and this is the first client that I've had with something called aerophagia, where apparently she swallows air into her stomach, and it causes abdominal distension and pain, discomfort. It can happen during meal times, but it can also happen during moments where she is overly excited or maybe upset or overstimulated over something. She tends to swallow air. Is that something that an SLP has experience treating? Is that one of your specialties as well?
Typically, it's not a specialty. It's not very common to have that. A lot of the time, in the few cases that I've seen, it became a habit, and they use it to self-stim. So it is, I mean, it should be approached both sensory and behaviorally. But yes, it definitely sounds like, without an evaluation, I can't really give prognosis, but it does sound like it is motor planning that is causing her to, this client to do that. So that's very interesting.
Great. That's great to know. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind. I want to ask you something really important. So, parents always come to us. They say one of the first concerns usually is my child can't talk. Will they ever be able to talk? Especially, not only do I have a diagnosis of autism, but now I also have a diagnosis of apraxia. Will a child be able to talk? What are the warning signs that your child might have apraxia in differentiation from just like a typical speech delay that may resolve much more easily? What are those warning signs they can be on the lookout for?
That's a great question. Like I said, apraxia is a spectrum. So typically the chain of command is a family goes to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician gives a diagnosis of speech delay on the referral.
Right.
And then it is the speech language pathologist's job to evaluate what the specific speech problem is, or auditory or motor problem is. If you look at the spectrum, you have severe apraxia, where a child is nonverbal, they can hardly move their muscles. Then the next step of the spectrum is they're moving their muscles a little bit. They can say a couple of words. Then next is they're putting words together, and more later developing sounds are coming. And then we move to they're having difficulty with a process. So there's either phonological disorder or articulation disorder. So phonological means it's a process. So there is a muscle or something happening with different words, but it's the same problem. For example, the tongue isn't going up, or they're deleting the last sound in a word, or they're deleting a syllable from a word. So it's a process that needs to be handled or looked at. And then articulation means they're substituting one sound for another sound. Usually it's a close approximation, but it's not. A very common typical delay is like saying the W sound for L or the W sound for R. And that is typical development. But as you go through the spectrum, it goes to just a phonological disorder, an articulation disorder, and then normal. So it's our jobs as speech language pathologists to push that client wherever they are on that spectrum to normal speech. And it's really all about being aware of how to prompt all those muscles in the correct order. It's very common to hear robotic speech. Have you guys come across robotic speech with clients? That is, robotic speech is taught. It's taught because there's something called assimilation, where if I were to measure me talking on a spirometer, you would see visually not words, but a string of syllables that I'm saying. And so what's happening is that instructors are teaching their clients one word at a time. So they're not teaching correct speech breathing while they're teaching speech or verbal skills to their clients. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah. I feel like it's been my experience, though, that like a newly diagnosed child will come to me without any prior therapy, and they kind of sound robotic all on their own. So I don't know. Again, I don't know that they've ever been directly taught by someone, or if that's just the natural way that they, I guess, processed and assimilated the speech or produced the speech. And I'm always, we always try to get them to speak in a much more natural intonation. I feel like that's been my experience. I don't know.
I've had an experience it's just with RBTs and even certain BCBAs. It's not even BCBAs, these teachers, parents, they try to break down the step instead of giving the whole sentence and like actually fully saying it and extending the sound. It's more like, I want ball instead of I want ball. Like, so it's much more natural, I guess, because we seem to teach in a way where are they comprehending each word at a time, or we should break it down at a time. That's how we do with shaping procedure. We do I first, and then we do I want, and then we do I want ball. So it just spaces out everything. And so that's why it turns out they sound more robotic. So
yeah, I get it. Yeah, that makes
And it
sense.
could be parents. Most parents of nonverbal kids will speech, their instinct is to try and repeat words and teach words too. So it could
Got
be
it.
taught by the parents as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much. That's very helpful, and I hope that you all have been able to really take away a lot of little nuggets of wisdom here with you. I know our time is almost up, but I want to, circle back and see if we have any last questions or any last comments. Maybe you can share with our listeners where they could potentially reach out to you directly for any questions they might have.
Sure. I actually, I've been in private practice since, 1991. And I do have a thriving private practice, and I collaborate all over the world. I love collaborating in Miami. Um, about 3 years ago, I wanted to reach more parents. A lot of families that come to me that I see are with me a long time, at least a decade. Not to I don't want it to sound like they're with me a long time, but I can only work as fast as typical development. And if you look at a nonverbal or an infant that can't talk, they're not talking in adult patterns until they're at least 7 years old. But a lot of my kiddos, not only do I work on speech and motor skills and auditory processing, but I also, once they're at a level where they're talking and functioning, I also teach them anything that requires motor planning. So whether it be typing or musical instruments or a vocational skill. So I do work on all levels with the client. And my door isn't open for my private practice very often. I have started this past year a program called Your Child Can Talk, and it's an online coaching program for parents and professionals. And basically, it is individualized. So as soon as a parent joins the program, I do speak with them one-on-one to get to know them, to get to know their family, and then we meet twice a week, and they can ask questions. I can give them resources, progressive tools. I can collaborate and give suggestions to their ABA team, to their speech language pathologist. It's more to empower parents than anything else. Professionals are very much welcome, but it's parents that really need to advocate for these kids. And they go through this process of, they get a diagnosis they weren't expecting most of the time, and they have to go through grieving process, and then it takes them years to find out what services are available in their area. So if I can help, because early intervention is so crucial with these kiddos, if I can help in any of that struggle to get the right services and the right resources, then I know I can change that family's life. They can find me at yourchildcantalk.com or speechworksbyelissa.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, I wanted to ask on following up with
Don't continue.
working with BCBAs. What do you have, what advice do you have for speech therapists, and even BCBAs in general, like the barrier that you guys, there's always a barrier. Like I know it's very uncommon for speech and ABA to work together and working in the same goals because of insurances and things like that. What advice do you give in collaboration, and what are the challenges?
That's a great question. I often find that most speech therapists that collaborate with ABA teams, and it's different in all parts of the world, but they do more traditional therapy. And so it's collaborating where both teams know what each other's doing, but they're not really collaborating like I do, where I'm showing how to prompt the muscles. So that you can get progress. So I'd like to see more of that evolving. For 30 years, I've been trying to revamp Lovas's verbal programs. And I hope it becomes, something that's taught as in the BCBA certification one day, because back in the early 2000s, it was a conflict of interest where I would hear it's out of the scope of practice. I don't feel it's out of the scope of practice. Many individuals don't. There's actually an organization now that joins speech language pathologists and BCBAs. So the field is progressing, and I love what I'm seeing. But back in the days, people would frown upon it. But I feel like if a speech language pathologist is part of the team, then it shouldn't be out of the scope of practice, because they're guided by a professional who's renowned in those muscles. Remind me to talk about oral motor placement before we go. Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
So something that I highly recommend for parents and speech therapists, all professionals basically, is there's something called oral motor placement. In the field of speech language pathology, there's a big controversy on oral motor skills. We can talk about that another day, but so they've coined the term oral motor placement, because what's important, a lot of speech therapists will just do non-speech exercises with muscles. But what oral motor placement does is it shows you exactly how to move that muscle in the right place for each sound, to coordinate those muscles for syllables, to put those syllables into words, and words into sentences and speak. So if anything, I highly recommend. There's a great, it's grown so much since 2000. It's called Talk Tools. It's a great site. There are BCBAs on there. There are speech language pathologists on there. So that's a really, really great resource for all families and the teams that they work for.
I'm going to check that out. Thank you so much for sharing that resource. I'm sure it's going to be very valuable. So two things. Number one, I highly encourage all BCBAs to form really close relationship with at least one SLP and one OT, right? Because I do believe that multidisciplinary resources for our children and our families are invaluable. You can learn so much from each other. The beginning of my career was working at a multidisciplinary clinic where I had daily access to these specialists, and I just learned so much from them about oral motor, about phonemes, and about physical prompting, like you're saying, for the individual speech sounds. That were invaluable to our practice. And like you said, early intensive behavioral intervention is key for these children. So, and the quality of that intervention matters a lot. And
Yes,
so when you're actively collaborating with a speech language pathologist or an OT, when they're just down the hall, if you happen to have a question, right? It's so much easier to provide high quality services than if you just email someone and have to wait 2 weeks to get a response, or if you just meet with someone quarterly, right? I mean, it makes a world of a difference. I was very interested in what you mentioned regarding the types of services that you provide to your clients, which seem to be, not very common or routine at all. So when you said you help them, to learn to play instruments, or with other like motor planning, it's been my experience that, medical insurance typically covers ABA therapy just as they cover speech and OT. And I'm aware that sometimes they cap kiddos out at 20 visits a year, 30 minutes a session. And it's just like, they basically walk in the door, we do a couple things, then session's over, right? It's very difficult, I imagine, to get a lot of progress with kiddos who need often, a lot of repetition. But what you said made me so curious, because I'm like, does insurance cover that? Or, that would have to be paid for privately, I assume, by the family. Am I right about that?
It depends. I have personally found that I can get quick progress from doing 3-hour consults every 4 to 15 weeks. So basically how I've set up my private practice is that I am on call for the family, including the BCBAs and the RBTs, 24 hours a day. I don't answer 24 hours a day, but Pretty much immediately I will answer, but to answer questions. And for some clients, once the team is pretty much trained and they only have to ask me questions here and there, I might see the team, twice a year. So it and it is affordable. I don't take insurance, but my rates are really affordable because the, the the time that you need to see me is so spread out. Um, but I was an insurance provider, and yes, I could still get progress and I could still coordinate. But unfortunately, I could only do 30-minute sessions. So I found it took longer to get progress. And practically, my private pay rates are less than a copay, your copays once or twice a week for speech therapy. So it is affordable. I want to be able to reach people and change lives. The group coaching is very affordable. I think the rate is $47 a month for 2 sessions a week. So that's pretty reasonable. Did I answer your question, by the way?
Wow.
I just wrote an article for a magazine about billing for speech therapy. And the challenge is that, for PT and OT, they have time sessions. We have very limited time codes. So for insurance, a time code, it doesn't matter if I see the client for 30 minutes or 3 hours, it's billed the same amount the same way. So most practices in the United States will limit the time to 30 minutes because they wouldn't be able to afford to keep their practice going. So unfortunately, it is challenging to work with insurance providers, but it's doable. It's definitely doable.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really do think it's a shame. It's a disservice. I'm hoping that one day that will change. That you guys will get together and rally and fight these insurance carriers to increase your rates, because I understand, right? It's a flat rate, so it's not necessarily timed to 30 minutes. It's just like a business decision to leave it at 30 minutes because that's all it kind of covers. But I guess I was just wondering, like, were you to accept insurance, or like maybe in the past when you did accept insurance, would they even allow you to bill for something like teaching the client motor planning on an instrument? Like, that's not a thing, right? If it's not directly related to speech and language production and communication.
You couldn't bill, obviously, through insurance. You can't teach
Yeah.
a musical instrument, but like if I'm teaching, the flute, then I'm working on speech breathing. Or if I'm teaching drumming and I put like pictures or colors on each one of the drums, and we do an auditory memory activity, then it can be billed for auditory memory. So there's ways to get around it. You just have to get creative.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's like same thing with behavioral goals. There's certain things that we do, like, oh, we're not supposed to focus on homework, but we have a behavioral goal that focuses on like the behavior, but working on, homework. There's loopholes to everything to that and how you write the goal. But overall, this was a great conversation. I think honestly, it's so great to work with Alyssa and hopefully other BCBs working with speech, because you held a good point. We are working on speech, but we're reinforcing certain sounds, or we're not getting the full approximation. We just keep continuing to do repetitions and kind of do errorless learning and try to wait till they, utter those sounds. So it's great to get like a speech perspective and work on those tactile prompts, or follow those muscle movements that you kept talking about, or even extending our sounds and how we can do that. But thank you for coming and joining us. Hopefully our next episode could be about picky eating. So Yeah, thank you, Elissa.
Excited to be here. I would love to share, maybe we can have an episode after picky eating about, some of the tools and showing parents and other professionals some of the progressive tools out there. There's so many incredible tools.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was kind of skeptical in the beginning about the tools. I was like, okay, what is this gonna help? Like as a behavior analyst, I'm like, that's not what I've learned. We've learned about like shaping and other procedures. So I was just like, but once I've seen it while we were incorporating our goals and our programs, I'm like, wow, it makes sense now. So thank you for joining us, and I'll see you guys next time.
Yes,
Yeah.
be sure to catch us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. We'd love to always hear from your questions so that we can tailor our content to you guys. See you next time.
Bye.